Israel-Palestine tensions took yet another deadly turn while Israel's massive raid on West Bank refugee camp on Jenin killed 10 and prompted thousands to leave. A Palestinian man rammed a car on a Tel Aviv sidewalk, injuring 8 people. Hamas militant group welcomed the attack as a heroic act of retaliation. Israeli police have called it a terrorist attack. The Palestinian suspect was shot dead by an armed civilian after he rammed his car onto a sidewalk before going on a stabbing spree. This prompted Israel's National Security Minister Ben Gvir to make this statement.
האזרח הזה הציל חיי אדם. זו המדיניות שלנו במשרד לביטחון לאומי, לתת לאנשים נשק כדי להגן על עצמם. אי אפשר לשים בכל רחוב שוטר, אפשר לתת לאזרחים נשק כדי שיגנו על עצמם, ואני משבח את הפעולה שלו, פעולה חדה.
The latest wave of violence began with Israel's massive raid on Jenin. Israeli army said the operation was aimed at destroying infrastructure and weapons of militant groups in the camp. The raid was launched with a drone strike in the early hours of Monday. It continued all day before entering into a second day with hundreds of troops participating in the same. The United Nations said it was alarmed by the scale of Israel's operation in Jenin.
So we are alarmed at the scale of air and ground operations that are taking place in Jenin and continuing today in the West Bank, and especially on airstrikes hitting a densely populated refugee camp. This is the second operation in Jenin involving airstrike within 2 weeks. Assessments are ongoing, and as I said, operations are continuing, but as of this morning, the Palestinian Ministry of Health confirmed the deaths of 10 Palestinians, including 3 children.
After more than 36 hours of clashes of varying intensity, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the Israel Defense Forces have completed the operation in Jenin. He added that this is not a one-time action and that attacks like the one in Tel Aviv will not deter Israel from fighting terrorism. Jenin is a Palestinian city in the northern part of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The city is under administration of the Palestinian Authority. The Jenin refugee camp, where the Israeli military launched an attack, is a densely populated part of the city. Israel claims that the Jenin refugee camp is an operating ground for armed fighters from different militant groups. Armed with an array of weapons, these groups are designated as terrorist organizations by the European Union and also the United States. Last year, well-known Palestinian-American journalist Shirin Abu Akleh was killed in a gunfire while covering an Israeli military raid near the Jenin refugee camp. Just 2 weeks ago, a raid by the IDF in Jenin killed at least 7 Palestinians, including militants and civilians. A day later, Palestinian gunmen killed 4 Israelis near the Israeli settlement of Eli in West Bank. This was followed by a series of violent rampages by Israeli settlers in Palestinian towns and even villages. Mheimar Abu Sada is a political analyst from Gaza. He's now joining us live to talk about what's happening in Palestine. Mheimar, welcome to the program and thank you very much for giving us your time.
It's my pleasure to be with you, and thanks very much for having me in your news program.
Mheimar, let me just start by asking you this. There is so much tension both in Tel Aviv and Jenin as we speak. There are reports that people are fleeing Jenin over fear of more raids. Mheimar, Israel says the raids in the West Bank is an operation to root out militants in that region. Do you think Israel's claims of heavy militant presence in that area are justified?
Well, let me start by saying that, yes, there are a number of militant Palestinian resistance fighters and resistance groups are based in the Jenin refugee camp who are responsible for a number of attacks against Israeli settlers and also Israeli military checkpoints in the West Bank. And Israel believes that Jenin and the Jenin refugee camp has become a headquarter for Palestinian resistance, especially in the north of the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority has no control in that area. And the Israeli army has conducted a number of military raids recently to try to uproot Palestinian resistance fighters and groups from the refugee camp.
Right.
But let me also add that the bottom of the problem is the continuation of the Israeli occupation. What we are witnessing now is an Israeli occupation that has been going on for 56 years now, that started in June of 1967. And the Israeli occupation and also Israeli settler violence against Palestinian villagers and Palestinian civilians also has exacerbated the situation. Just 2 weeks ago, a Palestinian resistance killed 4 settlers, and as a result, groups of Jewish settlers ran into Palestinian villages, set them on fire. Homes, vehicles, and farms were set on fire by Israeli Jewish settlers, where there are roughly 800,000 Israeli Jewish settlers who have been planted in the West Bank and East Jerusalem over the past 56 years. So what we have is an Israeli occupation, an Israeli settlement expansion, which is in violation of international law, right, and also in violation of many UN Security Council resolutions. So yes, there are Palestinian fighters, there are Palestinian resistance coming out from the Jenin area, but those fighters and those armed resistance groups are dedicated to fight back against the Israeli occupation, to fight back against Jewish settler violence against the Palestinians in the West Bank.
Mehemar, let me ask you also this. The president of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, suspended contact and even security coordination and said that other ties would also be cut. What does this action by the Palestinian president do to the dialogue efforts that were initiated some time back?
That is definitely a very good question. As you very much know, we have a Palestinian Authority that was established in the Palestinian territories, which is a self-rule government that is responsible for the daily life of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority was created after the signing of the Oslo Agreement in 1993, about 30 years ago. Now, as a result of the deadlock in the peace negotiations between the Palestinian Authority and the State of Israel, the Palestinian Authority took a decision a few months ago to suspend security coordination with Israel and with the security services in Israel, to put pressure on Israel to put an end to its occupation, to put an end to its settlement expansion, and also to put an end to its military attacks against the Palestinians in the West Bank. Unfortunately, none of that has happened. Israel has been given a green light from the U.S. and from Western countries to continue with its occupation, to continue with its military attacks against the Palestinians. Roughly since the beginning of this year, more than 180 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli military troops in the West Bank and Gaza. Most of them were killed in the West Bank as a result of the continuation of the Israeli military attacks against the Palestinians. So the Palestinian Authority decided to take this step to try to put pressure on Israel to put an end to its military attack. But I don't think that's gonna work, or that's gonna put an end to this current military operation against Jenin.
Mehemar, we are out of time, but I have to ask you this question, and I want your brief response to it. Why Jenin?
Jenin is a refugee camp, like many refugee camps which are scattered in West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and there are also Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Now, this is the second largest refugee camp in the West Bank. And why Jenin? Let me say that most of the military attacks that came out against Israeli military posts and Israeli settlers in the West Bank came from the Jenin area, or the Jenin refugee camp. And we also have a Jenin battalion that is very much connected to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, which is classified, as you mentioned earlier, as a terrorist group by the U.S. and many Western countries. So Israel basically is using that as a cover to target Jenin and to target the refugee camp But let me say that many of those who are being targeted by the Israeli military operation are Palestinian civilians, in which children have been killed, and hundreds of Palestinian families have unfortunately fled the current Israeli bombardment of the refugee camp.
Okay, I've been talking to a political analyst from Gaza, Mheimar Abusada. Thank you very much for giving us your time and for talking to WION World is One today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.